we got to start today with the show with the reports that have been coming out that Arkansas is not going to fully have their staff intact from last season coming into this next season, as this was being reported originally by Matt Zenitz, that Georgia State is expected to hire assistant secondary coach, or the defensive back coach, cornerback coach, whatever you want to call him, but Deron Wilson. He's going to be hired as their new defensive coordinator. He's been at Arkansas the past 2 years. He was also worked at Florida and was a defensive coordinator at McNeese State, but it looks like he is going to be moving on. So I just still felt like there was going to be some sort of change in the coaching staff, just given the trends and everything. But guys, when you heard the news of Deron Wilson being at least reportedly leaving Arkansas for Georgia State, what was your first reaction?
I'm happy for him, man. I really am. I think that's cool. If you're going to lose staff members, this is the way you want to lose them, in my opinion. You don't want to have to fire a dude. You definitely don't want to lose one of your coordinators right now. But when you lose a position coach, it's going to be, a coordinator somewhere else. That's usually signs that he's, well respected and doing a pretty good job. Now, I realize Arkansas secondary sucked last year, so you can take that for whatever it's worth. But I guess maybe I'm wrong. But if I had to, this is a weird game to play, but if I had to pick an assistant that I'd be fine with leaving, it would probably be him, because you already have Marcus Woodson, who is back there coaching the D-backs anyway. And so there's already going to be some familiarity. I don't know who he was responsible for recruiting out of the portal, or, whatever, like if there's going to be an impact there. But at the end of the day, I think it's cool, man. Anytime you can develop that coaching tree, that's a good thing for you. So good for him and wish him luck.
Yeah, good for him would kind of sum up my reaction as well, where I'm like, okay, yeah, nice. You get a nice little promotion. We only got to hear from Deron Wilson a couple times. Usually in fall camp was like our annual get to hear from all the position coaches. And I was always, like, for the most part, pretty impressed with them. I mean, most of the coaches, they're pretty well-spoken guys. Like, they all come across as solid, nice coaches that are doing a good job. And so, no surprise to see a lot of these guys he's a young guy also. I mean, I'd imagine he's going to continue to try and climb that ladder. So we wish him the best of luck. And you touched on it, Curtis, having Marcus Woodson as your secondary coach, and we'll see what they do. I'm sure they're going to hire, a 10th assistant to replace him. We'll see if that ends up being in the secondary. I actually wouldn't be surprised if that 10th assistant went somewhere else, whether it was a second D-line coach, probably not a linebackers coach, because Travis Williams is going to do that. But I've always actually, for the last couple of years, been a little confused by the dynamics there on the DB room, because Marcus Woodson is, I believe he's like the associate head or co-DC, and he's always been a secondary coach. But Deron Wilson's also always been there. And at practice, you always see them they'll usually split up guys, and you'll have some talking to them. So I don't know how the dynamics are going to really change in that room. But if there's one coach on this entire staff that I really am impressed with, it's Marcus Woodson. And so having him really makes me feel a lot better, to where, regardless of what Arkansas does to replace Deron Wilson, I'm not terribly worried about that group. And obviously, they really struggled. And I think that the talent in the DB room, we can talk about whether or not that's up to par. But Marcus Woodson, I'm a huge fan of. And I also just, at the end of the day, I feel like Travis Williams, as the defensive coordinator at Arkansas, has kind of had this trend where every time when he took over, we were like, oh, man, he's walking into a dumpster fire. This defense was horrible last year under Barry Odom. They're going to stink under him. And they ended up being good. We had mass exodus to the linebacker room, and we were like, oh, man, that's going to be horrible. How's he going to replace that? And he found a way to replace it. And so even though Travis Williams, I know he's a little bit of a polarizing figure. I know some people like him more than others. Ultimately, I feel like he finds a way to make it work no matter what. And so we'll see what this Arkansas defense is able to do. But this isn't a move where I see it and I'm like, oh, man, another huge blow for Arkansas. They're screwed. Good for Deron Wilson. We hope he does well, and we'll see what Arkansas does to replace him.
Yeah, and also with him, it's like, from my understanding, that Marcus Woodson was more of the safeties, and then he was cornerbacks. It is kind of how I think the dynamic worked out. But yeah, it was interesting to see that, because we've seen in a lot of cases two coaches coach the same unit, but we've seen a coach with defensive tackles and defensive ends. We've seen a lot of differences there. But I think this is one of those deals that you can have it both ways, where you can say it's like, I don't think anybody should be like, oh, thank goodness we got rid of this clown. But there's also like, hey, wish him nothing but the best of luck. It's a great move for him, which it is. I mean, because all these coaches that are assistants or position coaches or whatever, they want to move up the ladder. They want to do some things. And I think going and becoming the defensive coordinator of Georgia State is a great move for him. And I do also agree that given the circumstances of other coaches around the area and guys I'm sure Sam Pittman or Marcus Woodson or even Travis Williams have connections with, it's not going to be too difficult of a role to fill. The interesting thing for me is going to be about, like you said, Curtis, how much involvement did he have in recruiting of some of these guys that they got out of the transfer portal? Are some of them going to be like, okay, well, now I don't want to go to Arkansas because that was my coach, and that's the reason I went there. And if he's gone, I don't want to transfer anymore. Is it going to be that type of impact? Was it more of a Woodson thing? Is this come as a shock to some of these players? Did they know it was coming? I mean, that's going to be the interesting impact, I think, is not necessarily just, is Arkansas going to get worse or better in the secondary? It's more of, what about these players that are coming in the secondary? Are any of them going to have a change of mind because this guy is leaving to go to Georgia State?
Yeah, because I mean, they had to really revamp that entire part of the defense, So, and they've got a guy on campus right now in Caleb Wooden out of Auburn, who's a piece in the secondary that they're hoping to add. So that's interesting. But yeah, to your point, I mean, right away you can kind of see on social media. I'll tell you who's not dealing with this very well. It's Keyshawn Davila, the junior college corner, top-ranked JUCO corner in the country, who they picked up early in portal season. Now he's a junior college transfer or whatever, but as soon as the report came out, he tweeted out God's plan. As soon as another report went out, he just quote tweeted it with a broken heart emoji. So, he's not taking it very well. I'm sure he has relationships with other guys on staff, and they're on the defense, and but maybe that's just one to keep an eye on, because he seems like he's upset, and it sounds like there's probably a pretty strong relationship there.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. I mean, I feel like just the other day we were covering Keyshawn Davila's commitment, and right in the middle, was that he the one that committed right in the middle of the UCA basketball game? I think it was halftime of that game that we did that, or maybe that was Connie Walker.
That was the Oklahoma guy.
They were right around the same time. But I will say, and I mean, I'm not trying to throw shade, not trying to knock anybody, but it'd be one thing if Arkansas had like 7 awesome corners coming in from the high school ranks in the portal, but they really didn't recruit the secondary much at all in this high school class. So I can't imagine a ton of those guys. That's going to be like a huge hit there. And I think Davila's a nice player. I like Jordan Young is another nice player from Cincinnati. I like him, but it's not like there's not much you could really pick from Arkansas's corners in particular with this portal class. And so I'm sure there will be some questions to be answered. We'll see how it all shakes out. If any of those guys decide to explore other options, we'll also see, like you said, how it affects their recruitment moving forward. But I do think that's where having a guy like Marcus Woodson to kind of bridge that gap. I mean, if I were a player, if I'm Davila and Marcus Woodson calls me right now and he's like, "Hey man, don't decommit. We're fine." I'd be like, "Sure, I'll take your word for it." Like, he's just that kind of guy. And so again, like, I'm not trying to downplay Deron Wilson's role on the staff or like how he affects the program, but I don't know if this is going to be one that's going to change the entire direction of the program. But it is going to be interesting to see the kind of ripple effect in who they hire and if any of those players like a Davila end up exploring their other options.
Yeah, because I feel like this is kind of one of a few coaches that have been in the cornerback situation or whatever that Arkansas's had over the past few years. I know that you've had defense coordinator changes and everything too that go along with it. But it is fascinating because it's not all about Deron Wilson. I know that, or it's got Marcus Woodson involved too. But just the secondary in general, specifically the cornerbacks, we'll look at that. For the 2 years that Wilson was the coach of the cornerbacks at Arkansas, considering where they were before to where they are now, I mean, is there a grade that you put on the job that's been done at the cornerback position specifically? And we'll throw in nickelback in there too, but just at that specific position with the players, with the development, with everything. I mean, how much, if any, did it improve over the 2 years that Deron Wilson was the head coach over here?
Well, that's kind of tough to say, because I thought that there was some pretty promising stuff last year with the way Jalen Braxton emerged, and some of the other pieces that you had in there. But I mean, this year it wasn't very good. Now, I guess injury played a part in that. Like, you lost your projected number 1 for whatever reason in Braxton. So you didn't have that already put him behind the 8 ball. But the rest of it wasn't good. I mean, hell, you got to a situation after that Ole Miss game where you just had to do wholesale changes. Like, they flipped every starter back there, including their corners. They moved Hudson Clark back to corner. No offense, John, but so it wasn't good, that situation at all. And it was a combination, I think, of recruiting a little bit of tough luck, and like coaching is taken into account there too. So, over the course of the 2 years, I'd probably go, I don't know, C or so. But I mean, for last year, it's hard not to go with at least a D for me because it was one of the worst passing defenses in the country.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, and it definitely is a tale of 2 years because, I mean, 2023, like you mentioned, you had the emergence of Jalen Braxton as a true freshman, which was a huge story. It was a very promising development. Nudie McLaughlin, by the way, for all of the controversy with his concussion and his issues with Sam Pittman or whatever, was one of the highest graded corners in the entire country, had a really good year, should have gotten drafted. You had some, you had some promising pieces there. And then this year, I feel like it just, there wasn't really much progress made there. Keon Stewart was fine. He ended up kind of finishing the year as Arkansas's probably their most consistent corner. And again, like that kind of speaks to how much that group really struggled. You nailed it there. Like if you're moving Hudson Clark to corner, where he started his career and had some nice moments, but if you're moving him back halfway through the year, like it kind of speaks to the issues you have in the secondary and your ability to create some of that depth. We haven't gotten to see a lot of these young guys. I mean, Selman Bridges got in there for a little bit the other day. So who knows, maybe some of these young guys that they recruited will just magically turn into stars and we can kind of look back and be like, oh, okay, there's something there. But I think you had a nice player in Jalen Braxton, letting him leave. Hard for me not to knock that. Jaheim Singletary, who's a former 5-star recruit, has been on campus for 2 years now, hasn't really developed into a starting level SEC player. And so, yeah, I have a hard time giving him a super promising grade. I think C is probably about as good as you could ask for, or as good as he could ask for from us.
Well, and also, too, I started thinking about this, and this is not just like a Deron Wilson thing. It's just in the secondary in general. I feel like every single year under Sam Pittman, there's been at least one pretty important or pretty big contributor that's had something go awry. Like you had 2 years where Jalen Catalon was out with an injury and then out with another injury. Even back to 2020, remember Jerry Jacobs played the second game of the year and he's like, no, I'm out. And he ended up playing in the NFL. So, I mean, he was a really solid contributor there. You had Jalen Braxton this year out for the entire season, essentially. He was your best secondary player. And it just, didn't transpire the way you wanted it to. The Dwight McLaughlin and all that. I know that everything's going to be happening, but I just find it fascinating that in the secondary under Sam Pittman, and it's not a Sam Pittman thing, I'm just saying in his tenure, there's been like one big contributor that's something's happened. Injuries, getting benched, not playing, wanting to transfer, whatever it is. And I think that's not saying that, if those things didn't happen, Arkansas secondary and their pass defense would be incredible. But it does just kind of make you wonder what the stats would actually look like if they didn't constantly have these injuries, these issues, these players, all the problems that came along with them, and having an actual healthy secondary. Because it felt like most of the time the guys that were involved were their best secondary players on the team, and it wasn't even close.
Yeah. I mean, and Quincy McAdoo, it's just, it's just one thing after another. And it seems like it's all kind of been on the back end of the defense. That's a good point. And you think you're deep until you're not, you know what I mean? And if they would have had all their healthy bodies this year, then maybe it would have been a different story, but that wasn't the case. But, in other areas, you just have to kind of find a way to overcome that. I think it might just get exploited a little bit more, on the back end of a defense. You make one mistake back there and boom, it's over the top and it's a touchdown. You're the last line of defense. So, you don't have people behind you to pick up the slack there. But yeah, it's kind of crazy how that's worked out if you really think about it. And, we'll see what they wind up doing. I'm going to be interested to see, Andrew, I thought that was a good point that you brought up about, they'll probably fill this position because they're going to have it open, but do you add another person to the secondary, or is it going to be a different position coach for a different spot? Like what that might look like. It'll be pretty interesting to see what they do.
Honestly, I think if you're looking for like a way out of this and by the way, like we're not trying to act as if though this Deron Wilson departure is like a game changer. So if anyone thinks that that's what we're saying, like that's not really it. But I think if you're looking for a path forward for Arkansas, I would say finding someone who's got a couple transfers committed to them might be the way to go. Maybe bring in a secondary, a corners coach or whatever it is that's got some guys on board already. But yeah, John, I think that's a very good point. I never really thought about it that way, that Sam Pittman's entire tenure, secondary has been like building depth back there. And it's hard to build depth in college football really anywhere, especially in the SEC. But y'all remember Sam Carter, all the crazy drama that was going on with him, where it was like apparently the players hated him and he was a meanie, and then he ends up going to Ole Miss. Miles Slusher quits the team as well in 2022.
Yeah,
Like,
another one.
you just always had weird issues. And so if there's one thing Arkansas can hope to do this offseason, you've got to create some sort of stability there. And we'll see how these transfers they brought in, like a Connie Walker or Davila, who apparently someone in the chat said he deleted his repost now. So I'm sure someone texted him and was like, hey, don't do that. We'll see if they're able to get some of these guys to hit. But really, I feel like it's got to come from these young guys in the room, like a Summon Bridges or like an Akari Johnson or Jaden Allen or whoever it is. You've got to find some type of spark out of any of those guys. Because if you just look at it on paper, Arkansas secondary doesn't have a ton of depth right now going into this next season, and now you're losing another secondary coach. And so I guess if there's a positive spin from this, you lose a coach from one of the worst secondaries in the country and a group that didn't really have a super positive outlook anyway. So maybe you can maybe you replace them with someone that can bring a little bit of a spark, because the Arkansas secondary you could really need it.
Yeah, it makes me also wonder too, is this going to be if they say, assuming that they go with another cornerback coach or secondary coach to replace Deron Wilson, is it going to be something that Pittman goes to Marcus Woodson, says, all right, well, go find your guy, whoever you want? Is it more of a Travis Williams decision on who he wants? Maybe it's a joint effort. I don't really know, but I laughed when I tweeted out or quote tweeted about Wilson in that report. And somebody was asking me, he's like, oh, so who would be possible replacements? And I'm like, dude, I have no idea. Like, I have zero.
Let me check the hot board real quick of corner coaches.
I couldn't name you a single cornerbacks coach in the country.
No,
so I don't know.
No, like no offense, but I was lucky if I got Deron Wilson's name. I mean, it was just how little it is. So, but it's of all the coaches' positions to lose out on, that one might be all right. I think you're going to be fine. And it doesn't suddenly change my idea of what the wins losses are looking like or what the recruiting's looking like or anything like that. Now, if you lose any other staff in the head or any of the other coaches, let's maybe have a conversation about it. But yeah, again, congratulations to him moving up in the world, becoming defense coordinator. That's big time. So we'll see how it all plays out.